His Holiness Pope Francis told this body, from the very spot that I'm standing on tonight, that to imitate the hatred and violence of tyrants and murderers is the best way to take their place. When politicians insult Muslims, whether abroad or our fellow citizens, when a mosque is vandalized or a kid is called names, that doesn't make us safer. That's not telling it like it is. It's just wrong. It diminishes us in the eyes of the world. It makes it harder to achieve our goals. It betrays who we are as a country.
Hello, and welcome to the Black Ponder. I'm Neil Trotter. And what you just saw was a clip from President Barack Obama's last State of the Union address, where he was referring to, basically, Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump's remarks regarding Muslims and how we should stop allowing Muslims to enter America during this time of terrorism. But more generally speaking, the president was referring to the scapegoating that goes on during times of crisis. Society tends to associate blame to a particular group of people that have really nothing to do with the crises that goes on, but it's just an easy way for society to deal with that, kind of like a gut reaction, a quick reflex. And the president talks about how this is immoral, this is wrong. And even more generally speaking, he's talking about the bigotry that goes on in America as a whole. Bigotry certainly exists in this country, and you tend to see it come out when crises like terrorism happen. The president is saying that this is unethical, this bigotry, the scapegoating. It's wrong. And why is it wrong? Why is it unethical? Why is it immoral? Well, the president talks about how when we do that, it's basically feeding fuel to the fire of our enemies. They can use that as a tool to convince other people to join them. He talks about when we do this, it's harder for America as a country to achieve its goals. He talks about how that kind of action is directly inverse to what American ideals are all about. They're very utilitarian reasons. I want you to notice that. He really doesn't go into much detail about how it affects the individual that's being targeted personally, how it can cause emotional trauma, how it can cause psychological trauma when somebody is treated badly for something they didn't do. When a person is singled out and ostracized and attacked when they really didn't do anything wrong, that negatively impacts an individual, right? That's not very equitable. That's unjust. The president really didn't go into the personal damage that's caused when society starts doing that. Instead, the president focused on the societal impact, the sociological impact of that kind of bigotry, that kind of scapegoating. He talked about how it's detrimental to society. That's the reason why doing that sort of thing is wrong. And that aligns well with what David Hume is talking about in his book, An Enquiry Concerning the Principles of Morals. In that text, David Hume argues that morality, ethics, comes from utility, ultimately. Morality is all about doing what's constructive for society. And when it goes outside that realm, when we talk about doing good simply for goodness sake, that's meaningless. This is what Hume argues. Things are only moral when they can be applied to society's benefit. That's the only time when morality is meaningful. When virtuous acts don't contribute to the benefit of society, then such virtuous acts are meaningless. And calling such acts moral or ethical is illogical. Let me start you off with this quote. Utility is only a tendency to a certain end. And were the end totally indifferent to us, we should feel the same indifference towards the means. It is requisite a sentiment should here display itself in order to give a preference to the useful above the pernicious tendencies. This sentiment can be no other than a feeling for the happiness of mankind. and a resentment of their misery, since these are the different ends which virtue and vice have a tendency to promote. Here, therefore, reason instructs us in the several tendencies of actions, and humanity makes a distinction in favor to those which are useful and beneficial. Hume is saying utility is a basis of morality, and its utility toward mankind as a whole, the sociological progression of mankind. That's what's good. That's what's right. Anything that takes away from the sociological progression of mankind is immoral. Let's continue with another quote. If we consider the principles of the human make such as they appear to daily experience and observation, we must a priori conclude it impossible for such a creature as man to be totally indifferent to the well or ill being of his fellow creatures, and not readily of himself, to pronounce where nothing gives him any particular bias that what promotes their happiness is good, what tends to their misery is evil, without any farther regard or consideration. A priori is a very popular term in philosophy. It means knowledge without experience, basically. Fundamental knowledge, right? Knowing something without having to experience it. Like love, for instance. To know what love really is, you have to be in love first to know what love is. But there's just some things that we just know right off the bat, that we're just born knowing. And Hume argues that one of these things that we are aware of right off the bat is the well-being of other people. We are aware of another person's suffering or pain, and we're not indifferent about that. There's some feeling that conjures up within us when we witness that. Nobody looks at somebody that's suffering and has no feelings toward it. Like, oh, well, that guy's suffering, oh, well, whatever. No, everybody feels a certain way. Most people feel bad about somebody suffering. Some people enjoy watching other people suffer. People who deal with psychological disorders or things of that nature. But we all feel something toward it. That's an innate thing that we all have. This is what David Hume is saying. The tendencies of actions and characters, not their real accidental consequences, are alone regarded in our determinations or general judgments. Though in our real feeling or sentiment, we cannot help paying greater regard to one whose station, joined to virtue, renders him really useful to society than to one who exerts the social virtues only in good intentions and benevolent affections. Separating the character from the fortune by an easy and necessary effort of thought, we pronounce these persons alike and give them the same general praise. The judgment corrects or endeavors to correct the appearance, but is not able entirely to prevail over sentiment. And because of this innate feeling that we have, this conscience is what a lot of people call it, right? This internal sense of right and wrong, pretty much based off of empathy. Because of this, virtue is tied together with contributing to the well-being of other people. When somebody does an action that takes away somebody else's suffering, that's considered moral. That's considered ethical. Our internal sense views this as such. And when we do actions that do not contribute to the well-being of other people, there's something inside us, deep inside, that tells us, you know what, this really isn't moral, is it? I mean, you might say this is virtuous, but I'm not really contributing to helping anybody's well-being. So is this really moral? There's a struggle, a conflict in there. So virtue plus sociological utility is what morality is. Virtue without utility, doing good just for the sake of goodness, it's hard to make the case that such things are moral. Skepticism starts to rise up. It has often been asserted that as every man has a strong connection with society and perceives the impossibility of his solitary subsistence, he becomes on that account favorable to all those habits or principles which promote order in society and ensure to him the quiet possession of so inestimable a blessing. As much as we value our own happiness and welfare, as much must we applaud the practice of justice and humanity. by which alone the social confederacy can be maintained, and every man reap the fruits of mutual protection and assistance. This deduction of morals from self-love or a regard to private interests is an obvious thought and has not arisen wholly from the wanton sallies and supportive assaults of the skeptics. Basically, Hume is referring to when people start to come to the realization that there's something bigger than them individually, that there exists a greater cause. I'm only a small part in this vast universe, and I need to do my part to contribute to this vastness, right? It's why many people put themselves in dangerous situations, because they're trying to contribute to the well-being of other people. That's their internal sense of morality. People in law enforcement, first responders like firemen, paramedics, people who join the military, or all types of other professions, or even actions where people tend to put their own well-being at risk to help the well-being of others. When we start to put the well-being of society over the well-being of the individual, this is our internal sense of morality. This is what David Hume argues. When any man, even in political society, renders himself by his crimes obnoxious to the public, he is punished by the laws and his goods in person. That is, the ordinary rules of justice are, with regard to him, suspended for a moment, and it becomes equitable to inflict on him for the benefit of society what otherwise he could not suffer without wrong or injury. So we even change what morality is based on the situation, based on what's good for society at that time. Normally, killing somebody is considered immoral, unless it's capital punishment, where the law determines that somebody does something extremely bad because it's extremely harmful to society. Then we say, okay, in that instance it's okay to kill that person to provide justice for the sociological benefit of mankind. Hume's argument is saying, like, look, morality isn't fixed. It changes based on what is good for society at that time. The rage and violence of public war, what is it but a suspension of justice among the warring parties, who perceive that this virtue is now no longer of any use or advantage to them. The laws of war, which then succeed to those of equity and justice, are rules calculated for the advantage and utility of that particular state in which men are now placed. And were a civilized nation engaged with barbarians who observe no rules even of war, the former must also suspend their observance of them, where they no longer serve to any purpose, and must render every action or rencounter as bloody and pernicious as possible to the first aggressors. And Hume brings up the example of war, right? Where people do horrible things to other people. People kill each other, people blow each other's limbs off, people come back all psychologically damaged, and all types of horrible things happen. But we tell ourselves, well, we're gonna allow this for the greater good of society. Normally it's wrong to go out and kill somebody, or to maim somebody, or to put somebody through intense psychological trauma, but this is what's necessary for the good of society. Therefore, this is moral. And we consider people who go to war and do those things and go through those experiences heroes, moral, ethical heroes. And we consider them as such because we believe they're offering utility to the society of mankind. They're offering some of the greatest sociological utility. So true is it that the virtue derives its existence entirely from its necessary use to the intercourse and social state of mankind. Thus, the rules of equity or justice depend entirely on the particular state and condition in which men are placed, and owe their origin and existence to that utility, which results to the public from their strict and regular observance. Reverse in any considerable circumstance, the condition of men produce extreme abundance or extreme necessity, implant in the human breast perfect moderation and humanity or perfect rapaciousness and malice. By rendering justice totally useless, you thereby totally destroy its essence and suspend its obligation upon mankind. The common situation of society is a medium amidst all these extremes. We are naturally partial to ourselves and to our friends, but are capable of learning the advantage resulting from a more equitable conduct. Few enjoyments are given us from the open and liberal hand of nature, but by art, labor, and industry, we can extract them in great abundance. Hence, the ideas of property become necessary in all civil society. Hence, justice derives its usefulness to the public, and hence alone arises its merit and moral obligation. Again, Hume is saying that morality derives from the utility of society and nothing else. Hume here is referring to and kind of undercover arguing against the power structure during his time and in his area, which is the church. The church had major political power, and the church would say, well, this is wrong, and this is unethical, and this is moral. And Hume believed that a lot of what they said was wrong had nothing to do with the progression of human society. Of course, the church would literally say, well, it's wrong because God said so. That's why it's wrong, and that's the only reason we need to give. And Hume was opposed to this. He didn't say it directly during his lifetime, because if you said that, you were in deep trouble, right? The church would take you out. But you can see hints to this kind of attitude in his work. And I believe he's right in saying that if you say something is moral, you better make the case that it contributes to the progression of human society, that is best for the well-being of mankind. And your case needs to be supported with logic and reason, right? You can't just make blanket statements saying that, well, it's because God said so, because you're going to get a lot of skepticism from that. I mean, people might not go out and say it because they're afraid, but deep inside, they're going to be like, I don't know about that. You got to make a stronger case. This is what Hume is saying. This is a very influential work, The Enquiry Concerning the Principles of Morals. It's a classic philosophical work regarding ethics, morals, what's right and what's wrong. It's a philosophical examination of that. It's one of the texts that put David Hume on the map, made him the classic philosopher that he is. So I encourage you to read it. It's a great introduction to moral philosophy. Well, you've been listening to The Black Ponderer. Tune in next time for more philosophical thought. Those with persons entirely disingenuous, who really do not believe the opinions they defend, but engage in the controversy from affectation, from a spirit of opposition, or from a desire of showing wit and ingenuity superior to the rest of mankind. That's a troll. David Hume's describing a troll, an internet troll. The only way, therefore, of converting an antagonist of this kind is to leave him to himself. For finding that nobody keeps up the controversy with him, it is probable he will at last, of himself, from mere weariness, come over to the side of common sense and reason. Well, there you go. David Hume's advice on how to deal with internet trolls.